We have the Green Horizon Summit coming up on the 9th of November. It's going to be an enormously exciting and I hope very thoughtful event. What do you hope to get out of these 3 days with some of the world's leading figures in the area of green finance?
Well, I'm really excited about the absolute stellar cast that we've put together. It really is a meeting of the minds of some of the most thoughtful people on these topics. I think we've got 12 global CEOs coming, as well as cabinet ministers and leaders of multilateral organizations. So a real international cast, which I think is really important at this point, that we expand our horizons. What I'm really looking forward to and I'm hoping for is lots of practical suggestions.
Yes.
I think we've done a great job as a green finance community in raising awareness over the recent years.
Yes.
And now increasingly people are asking how, not why.
But just in that 5 years, you have yourself moved from being a capital markets banker at a major UK bank issuing in the green space. You were awarded an OBE for your work in green finance, which is fantastic. And here you are running a green finance institute dedicated to really practical outcomes. How easy is that?
It's getting harder and harder given that the agenda is accelerating. So it's a fantastic opportunity and a real platform at the moment to be looking at how we actually mobilize capital towards where it needs to go at pace and at scale in the real economy. And speaking of Mark Carney, obviously we're very much looking forward to some of the announcements that he has to make at the Horizon Summit, which have been years in the making. And I think that's going to be a real highlight.
Really, this feels to me like an unstoppable boulder rolling down a hill now. We are not going to go back, as far as I can see it, on the whole ESG platforming for investors. We're not going to go back on this accountability of our finance and what we're doing, the purpose of money, if you like, in terms of the way that banks, insurance companies, investors look at their investments. I really hope these 3 days are going to mark something of a marker. There will be something of a marker towards COP26 in a year's time.
I think your point about the ball has started rolling and the momentum behind all this is really well made. As financiers, we're used to seeing cyclical trends. And I think maybe for some time people did think that climate and ESG was a fad. And it wasn't something that necessarily needed to make the top of the priority list because, like many other fads, it might go away. But I think the awareness is there now that the physics underlying climate change, it's not going to change. And therefore, this is something that we need to integrate into the way that we think about finance, into the purpose of how we do finance. It's not about chasing pockets of value. It's about pivoting entire financial institutions so that they're aware and that they can mitigate the risk, but equally recognize the opportunity, partnering with clients, partnering with the profound changes that we're seeing in the economy. And I think it's a really exciting time to be a financier right now.
I think so too. I mean, I remember post 2008, 2009 crash, bankers were the pits. I mean, you know, we had sunk in the public opinion low down. And for me, green finance is a way of demonstrating, hard demonstration of what cannot be described as anything else but good finance. I like your point also about that this was a fad. And I think one of the great gifts that we have in London is the deep-rooted realism, rather than cynicism, realism that many of our institutional investors and our analysts, our credit analysts, our stock analysts bring to their work. And I think everything should be treated with some suspicion until it proves itself. But the green finance revolution, as it is now, looks to me like, it's very real, because there's a real risk to measure. There are clearly very interesting opportunities to finance. Energy is just one of many which are looking like there are real technical opportunities coming. And the major point for me is that governments have woken up to this in a big way, and every government in the world is talking ESG, is talking sustainable language, and wants to see changes happen. So if you have a combination of government, practical reality, and an investor drive, I think we have a very interesting 5 to 10 years coming up in the financial markets. And I hope that point will come across here in Mansion House on the 9th to the 11th of November, when we will be getting together with some of the most exciting speakers in the world.
And that is absolutely going to be key. It's collaboration between the policymakers and the financial providers. because it's become such a cliche, but the public sector can't do it by themselves, private sector can't do it by themselves. But I think increasingly we're seeing an electorate that wants to see climate action and climate impact. And I think that's going to give governments even greater license to be bolder and to move more quickly. And it's having clarity on those policy pathways and those technology pathways that are going to enable us as financiers to be able to innovate and provide the right sort of products and services to support the whole transition.
Many of the products that you and I are now seeing as bankers in the market are related to, for instance, the oceans, such as blue bonds. We've seen vaccine bonds, red bonds. We're seeing social bonds, housing bonds, defined purpose lending, or defined purpose issuance of bonds, not always purely in the E space, more perhaps in the social space. And I suspect this has been given a bit of a boost through the COVID-19 pandemic that we've seen during the year. Do you think that's continuing, or do you think we'll see a more of a rebound back to the environmental, towards the E of ESG?
I genuinely think the E and the S are starting to become more closely aligned. They always were one and the same. The pathways to prosperity and the pathways to jobs have to be green, sustainable pathways. Otherwise, you're investing in stranded assets and stranded jobs. And therefore, those two things were never separate. So I actually genuinely hope one of the things that we'll see as part of the green recovery is an ever closer alignment of the E and the S. And it would be remiss not to mention the call on the UK government to come to issue a green plus gilt, which is work that we've been doing with our partners at the Impact Investing Institute and the Grantham Research Institute, pressing on government that now is the opportunity to show UK leadership and help develop that green bond market.
I absolutely agree. I think the pressing issue has of course been about environmental, because that's the one we've learned to measure better. And I think we still have work to do on the yardsticks that we need for social improvement measurement. And I think every green bond clearly has its environmental targets, independently verified. The social aspects can be demonstrated, but to give them the same kind of yardstick improvements will require, I think, further work on the taxonomy. And I think that's something we will see quite a bit of work on over the next year or two going forwards.
Another area where we need clarity on standards and a taxonomy, in fact, a whole new way of thinking, is around the impact of nature more broadly on the financial system. Obviously, we've got Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and as you say, the ability to measure carbon impacts. And that's already in train. But now I think there's an increasing appreciation that we need to look at biodiversity loss. We need to be looking at the depletion and degeneration of nature and how that's impacting supply chains, how that's impacting business models, and ultimately how that's going to impact loan books and P&L.
Absolutely. In fact, as you know, the Treasury is this autumn issuing a review of the economics of biodiversity loss under Professor Partha Dasgupta. And I think that will be part of stimulating the debate around looking at nature as an asset and trying to give value to that asset for every bit of food, every bit of mining, every bit of transportation that we undertake. I think it's a really difficult job, but I think there are lessons that we have learned from the climate discussion around the measurement of carbon and attaching a strategy for reducing the carbon in every company that we can also apply to the oceans, to the lands, to the forests, to land degradation. And I think I completely agree with you. I think it's a very exciting area of finance going forward. I noticed that at these 3 exciting days that we have coming up in November, there will be a major session on the economics of biodiversity loss.
The Institute has a unique position sitting, as we do, at that nexus between the policymakers and the private market. So we have a huge opportunity to bring all the smartest minds together to figure out these really wicked problems. And as you say, we're focusing them very much on real economy outcomes. So the financing green part of that two-sided coin. And we're making real progress in the areas that we've chosen to focus on, such as energy efficiency of buildings, and now also looking at zero carbon heating. And that methodology of bringing a coalition together, but focusing very much on finance outcomes, we're now going to be applying it to transport. And we're going to be talking about all these things at the summit with some real experts. And also going back to our point about nature. Obviously, your involvement with the Dasgupta review We're also involved on the new task force for nature-related financial disclosures. We're working closely with the Environment Agency on actually trying to create a new supply pipeline of innovative nature-based ideas so that we can actually direct capital towards them. So when it comes to a number of these situations, the barriers and the challenges are different. And I think there's an increasing realization that having large commitments or arbitrary targets, they're fantastic for setting the direction and for really elevating the dialogue. But some of the hard graft really needs to start happening at a local level, at a pretty granular level.